Good evening, everybody. It is the 16th of November 2025, 12:31 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And in today's video, I'm going to be covering fractals, the lesson, and the Q&A. Now, I do want to apologize to everybody who did end up making up this or end up making to the stream yesterday. And for those of you who didn't show up, this is your recorded version. And the apology comes from the fact that the video was corrupted. For some reason, Discord audio conflicts with the snipping tool audio, and the video was not recording any audio. So the video was up, it was good, but there was no audio. So that defeats the entire purpose of the Fractal Q&A session if there is no audio whatsoever. So I do want to start off by saying that this video will be the lesson that I covered yesterday, and it will be the Q&A. Only because I lost audio does not mean I don't have access to the questions that were asked. So once I finish the lesson, I'll be going ahead and demonstrating a few examples or an example of a fractal, how to draw it out, and then I'll be doing the fractal Q&A part where I'll be reviewing and answering all the questions you guys wrote yesterday one by one by showing you guys them on Discord chat. All right, so I have them all saved and I can read them and just show you guys and answer your questions via the video. So again, I do apologize for the inconvenience, but we're still here. We move forward. All right. So in today's video, as I already mentioned, it is the fractal lesson. I'll be covering what exactly is a fractal, how to draw it out, when to utilize it, where it derives from, so on and so forth, everything regarding fractals. So hopefully you guys enjoy this video and it answers every question you guys may possibly have. And if there is still any questions remaining, I do suggest you guys to go ahead and ask me either in your journal or in private chat if you guys can. Or you can reach out and DM me. I'll answer as well. Thank you. So let's start off with the first portion of the fractal Q&A, the foundational information, the concepts you need to understand before watching this lesson. We're going to sit here for a few minutes and discuss each of these one by one. First of all, you have sequential SMT. Sequential SMT is the pinnacle of fractals. Okay, it is the pinnacle and it is the foundation. It is both. Okay, without them, you cannot have a fractal. Period. Like, fractals will not exist unless you have sequential SMT. True opens. If you guys already know about fractals, you know the importance of true opens and what they have in terms of fractals, structure, and narrative. You guys have most definitely, if you've been here in the server for a while or have been in the community for a few weeks, you've definitely heard me mention structure and narrative. This, I would say, is on par with sequential SMT in terms of importance, because without the proper structure and narrative, it's not going to work. Now, again, I'm not going to be like everybody else saying, oh, it's structure and narrative, and not explain exactly what I mean by structure and narrative. Of course, I'm going to explain what I mean by structure and narrative in this video as well. But 3 and 4 should honestly just be put together because both of those are equally as important as sequential SMT in terms of fractals, right? Now, I do want to say, if you are confused regarding sequential SMT or true opens, we do have videos on the WAP covering both those topics alongside with structure and draws and liquidity, which that is indirectly spoken about in terms of narrative. We have a video on all the topics that are in this foundational information within the WAP. And lastly, premium and discount, which in itself should be self-explanatory. You guys already know the importance of premium and discount and how I like to use it within pretty much all of my trades, right? Of course, understanding if we are in discount or premium of a range and which range I'm looking to gauge premium and discount, because that's also a big misunderstanding when it comes to it taking shorts or longs. People think that shorting after a drop is shorting in discount, but fail to understand what exactly or what range they're really referencing to then go ahead and support the understanding of shorting and discount in quotations, right? You're not really shorting and discount after a drop if the overall range you're swing grading is far larger than the drop provided. All right, so again, keep that in the back of your mind for all you guys who are there. All right, so what exactly is a fractal? right? A fractal is a refined range that is supported by sequential SMT and is limited with the ICT MMXM alignments that were provided within his YouTube mentorship, right? Everything within price can be refined, yet the ranges utilized by QT traders tends not to be. Why is that? This is a question that many of you guys should be asking yourselves. And if you do want to go ahead and succeed and see improvement, ask yourself questions with the information provided. Right now, of course, ask yourself logical questions, not stupid questions of like, oh, why is it this? No, say, how does this come to be? How does this come into fruition? How does this apply in terms of my strategy, in terms of the logic that I say I believe in, right? So again, if QT traders refine everything in terms of higher time frame PSP with a lower time frame PSP within it, or a higher time frame SMTF with a lower time frame sell model or buy model, whatever it may be, why can't QT traders refine the ranges themselves to then identify a specific point in price where there can be a high probability reversal, right? So again, keep that in the back of your mind, right? Sequential SMT initiates the potential for a fractal to form. It is not always going to form every single time right after the sequential SMT appears. It may be the candle following, all right? So quick little disclaimer before we move on, right? Fractals are just ranges that are refined by sequential SMT, right? And I'm going to go into, I wouldn't say a sidetrack, but a little rant regarding Power of Three. And if you are a ICT trader who supports the idea of Power of Three, which you should be, how the way you're viewing ranges is skewed. So I'll bring an example to the table, right? Let's say you have a low created at 9 a.m. and then we have 10 a.m. news. 10 a.m. opens within the 9 a.m. candle's range and then shoots up and takes out the high of the 9 a.m. candle. You want to see price come back down to discount, but you graph out your OTE or your range from the 10 a.m. high after the news came out to the low that's provided, whether it could be, let's say the low's created at 9 a.m., so 9 a.m. So with that being said, you're including the 10 a.m. candle high into your range. Why is that? Why are you doing that? And the reason why I asked that question is because logically speaking, okay, if 10 a.m. hosts a new Power of Three and you're expecting price to migrate lower and not higher, why are you including the high of the 10 a.m. candle within your range if that's a new Power of Three? The 9 a.m. candle is its own hourly Power of Three. The 10 a.m. candle, it's its own hourly Power of Three as well. Why are you adding that into the range? The range should be the 9 a.m. candle itself, not the 10 a.m. high included within the 9 a.m. range. That makes no sense. You're essentially excluding the 10 a.m. potential manipulation that's being instilled. You're excluding that from the range prior, and you're putting them all into a bundle together, which again makes no sense, right? In terms of Power of Three, each candle has its own range, and we'll reference the candle prior to then gauge what it will do next. If the draw on liquidity is higher, it will reference the 9 a.m. candle's range in some way, shape, or form. Look for support at some point within that range, and then migrate higher till the higher time frame objective is mitigated up in buy side, right? And if it's not bullish, and price has already mitigated its higher time frame POI or its strong liquidity, it will usually rate the 9 a.m. candle high using it as an intermediate term high, and then initiate a sell program back down to the 9 a.m. candle low, causing price to sell off lower. Again, logic behind fractals of how you guys should be viewing it and how fractals came into fruition, right? So fractals allow the user to utilize a high probability range that will be refined with quarterly theory supported by time-based POIs. Now, I've already mentioned this in the first slide. What do I mean by time-based POIs? There's already a video on the WAP that's out that's called time-based POIs. NWOGs, NDOGs, true opens, such as true week, true day, true month, true quarter, true session, all right, and true micro session, overall time-based POIs, not price-based POIs, time-based POIs. Remember that what we're looking for in terms of fractals is time-based POIs supported by cracks and correlations that were created via time. What do I mean by that? quarterly Kraken correlations, sequential SMTs, right? Those are that's the foundation of fractals, as I mentioned prior, and this in itself is how fractals again came up. Okay, so why are time-based POIs so important? They are points in price that cannot be manipulated, right? Remember that everything on the y-axis, right, the high or up and down of the chart, can be manipulated by big orders, order spoofing, anything, market or manual intervention, anything can go ahead and manipulate the y-axis of the chart. So if that can be manipulated, what are we going to reference in price to then allow us as a trader to go ahead and use a high probability area that can't be manipulated? We're going to be using true opens, right? The Q2 opening as a POI, right? So your NWOGs as new week, new day opening gaps within itself, or true opens, right? The Q2 openings, true London, true day, true New York, true week, true quarter, so on and so forth, right? So that's what I mean by using time-based POIs. And as you guys can see in the middle of the chart, I have an example of what a fractal can be, right? You have the high, the low of the range, equilibrium, and the OTE of that range as well, with the C of the OTE. Now, of course, it looks like I have every single line graphed out in discount, but again, the equilibrium is just there as a reference point, and the OTE is there because I'm putting out the OTE range. It's fairly simple to understand that idea, right? So this is exactly how a fractal will look like. Right now, of course, it won't look picture perfect like this, but this would be the foundation of how a fractal should be appearing, right? So you have your sequential SMT. We're going to go ahead and say this is 90-minute cycle sequential SMT created, let's say Q2, Q3, right? Q2, Q3, or Q1, Q2, 90-minute cycle sequential SMT. This is then your 9 a.m. candle right here, right? The 9 a.m. candle is a fractal distribution, meaning it's a down close candle on every single asset class that distributes lower in price. And then you have 10 a.m. opening being this red line right here, which goes ahead, takes out the candle's low, sealing the range. That's what I mean by sealing the range. The new hourly opening after the fractal range is formed goes ahead and seals the range, and then comes back up into its true open or time-based POI, NWOG, NDOG, so on and so forth, right? So you can take a trade to or from this, and I'll explain later in the video what I mean by that. But here you have your sequential SMT, and you may ask, Halo, why 90-minute an hour? I'm going to go over that within the next slide, and hopefully you guys will understand exactly how this would be implied within the marketplace. So what are the time frame alignments for fractals? The time frame alignments for fractals are fairly simple and are a mixture of QT alignments alongside the ICT MMXM alignments provided within his YouTube. All right, the ones that everybody knows, the 1 hour PD array, 5-minute sell or buy model, 4 hour PD array, 15-minute buy or sell model, so on and so forth, right? 15-minute PD array, 1-minute buy or sell model, all the stuff that you guys already know. We're just mixing those two together, essentially, right? Which is what's going to give you your fractal range, right? The QT alignment will allow you to spot the sequential SMT, right? And the correlated time frame that you're utilizing to spot the sequential SMT would be considered your lower time frame. Then you would look for the ICT alignment for your range or your, in quotations, higher time frame. So what do I mean? The correlated time frame for the microcycle is a 1-minute time frame. In essence, the 1-minute time frame is a lower time frame. Using the MMXM alignments, what's the higher time frame for the 1 minute? The 15-minute, right? So then you will end up graphing out a 15-minute fractal, right? 90-minute cycle sequential SMT. What's the correlated time frame for that? Is the 5-minute time frame. And then what time frame would be the higher time frame for the 5-minute? The hourly time frame, which then will give you your hourly fractal. Daily cycle sequential SMT, 15-minute time frame being your lower time frame. Higher time frame for the 15-minute is the 4-hour. Weekly cycle, low correlated time frame is the hourly time frame. And then that lower time, or the hourly time frame would be the lower time frame for the daily, right? And then monthly cycle, 4-hour, and then weekly fractal, right? So if I were to throw away, if I were to go ahead and erase the microcycle and all the sequentials from this, it would look simply just as the MMXM alignments just reversed. Lower time frame, higher time frame, lower time frame, higher time frame, lower time frame, higher time frame, so on and so forth. Now, if I were to erase the fractal correlated time frames on all of these, you would basically have just the QT alignments: microcycle 1 minute, 90-minute 5 minute, daily cycle 15, weekly cycle 1 hour, monthly cycle 4 hours, so on and so forth, right? So all of this is applied within, again, the basic stuff that you guys all know and love, right? So it's just mixing these two together, then you end up getting your fractal range, right? So here's another image of what a fractal will look like, right? So understanding that logic and incorporating that logic within your trades, right? You have sequential SMT. Let's say this is microcycle sequential SMT. Then you have a 15-minute bullish fractal, right? 15-minute bullish, let's say a fractal. In this case, we'll do a PSP, right? Fractal PSP. 15-minute fractal PSP. And then let's say this is a 9:30 candle, and then 9:45 opens. What do you expect to happen at 9:45? You would want to see price raid the high of the previous 15-minute candle and then make its move back down into its true open or time-based POY that's under us, that aligns with the OTE of the range. So utilizing this logic, right, you can have sequential SMT at the highs after you seal the range. Sometimes it won't form. Sometimes it will end up being an intermediate term low and high soup before end up going lower. In this case, as you can see, intermediate term low raid, intermediate term high coming from the previous 15-minute candle, and then price makes its move back all the way down to sell side, which then ends up mitigating its time-based POI, which is NWOG, NDOG, or the true open. So again, sequential SMT can form at the highs. Not saying it will form, but if it does form, it's higher probability for it to go ahead and make a move lower. But there are cases on where it won't form, and you basically have a rate of the low, intermediate term low right above the OTE, tap into the OTE with the true open and NWOG and NDOG, and make a move back up to buy side, right? All the simple stuff that you guys know and love. Now, utilizing this logic, I do want you guys to take this image that I provided with you guys with discretion. Why do I say that? Well, there's a multitude of reasons why. The first reason being predominantly because you're not always going to form the sequential SMT. And in times where you do form the sequential SMT, you need to trade it with caution, right? I will give the disclaimer that fractals, the way I trade them, is with 10-point reactions off of the true opens or the time-based POIs. But I also do the exact same logic when it comes to, taking trades to fractals, right? I do want to say, your entry model regarding fractals is completely up to you. I'm not going to tell you what your entry model should be. This is simply covering the topic of fractals. The rest is obsolete because that is personal preference. What I will say, and what I see as a commonality between everybody here who trades them within the server, is the people who are trading CISDs are getting, I wouldn't say cooked, but they're getting mediocre risk to reward entries, which is causing them to get stopped out or having trouble if they should put break even once the fractal OT is mitigated. If you take these 10-point reactions or reactions in general, right? It doesn't have to be a 10-point reaction, it could be anything you like really, with a protected high or low, you will be able to have a higher risk to reward ratio and be able to easily, without any anxiety, jam stops to break even and let your trade run to ATP, or have your OTE, your time-based POI, being your take profit, right? Lastly, before we move forward, you are not limited to trading from the fractal, meaning you don't only have to take a trade off of the true open or the time-based POI. You can also take trades from it. To it. My apologies, to it. So if you have price, let's say, form a bullish fractal, in this case, you're using structure and narrative to determine if you're going to do this or not. Overall, lower time frame structure is bullish. Obviously, we have our microcycle sequential SMT. Your higher time frame range is bearish. So what do we know using basic ICT and basic market structure? Lower time frame bullish, distribution up higher, and a higher time frame bearish range. More than likely, that lower time frame bullish push is going to be an intermediate term high that's being created to then have a continuation lower if there's no sequential SMT at the lows. Higher time frame sequential SMT, of course. So in this case, all we have is microcycle. We'll subscribe to the idea that we have a higher time frame bearish market structure and sequential supporting that market structure. We would expect this intermediate term push right here to be invalidated once the next 15-minute candle opens and seals the fractal range. You can take a trade down to the fractal OTE if that's the case. All right. Structure and narrative. You have a bearish narrative, but you have bullish lower time frame structure, meaning what? You're going to wait for an opportunity to then short back down to sell side. So as I was saying, I suggest all of you guys to take fractals with a grain of salt in terms of structure and narrative, simply because if you do not incorporate structure and narrative within your trade ideas, you're going to get fucked. And I don't want you guys to get fucked. So please understand, is the lower time frame bullish? Is the higher time frame bullish? Or are they opposing each other? And if they're opposing each other, really reevaluate what you want to do in terms of the trade you're about to take. Okay. So hopefully that goes ahead and secures or coincides with a few of your questions that you guys may possibly have. Personally, not one of the questions I'm about to go ahead and review, but if it does, perfect, right? So the logic behind fractals, all right? This is the simple idea of where fractals came from, right? The logic behind fractals is fairly simple. If price can be refined off of every PD array, the range that is utilized can also be refined. As I already mentioned in the second slide, my apologies, right? That fractals are just refined ranges, right? Using the logic that everything else can be refined in quarterly theory, why can't we refine the range itself, right? So the range given by fractals is limited by the correlated higher time frame to the sequential at hand, meaning the range that is given that you're going to be using as a fractal, as I already mentioned with the time frame alignments, is going to be the higher time frame to the correlated time frame that you spot the sequential SMT with. So 5-minute higher time frame for that is the hourly. Basic logic, all right? We already covered that stuff. Price will work in a multi-step process to either redeliver or reverse off of fractals, and I'll cover this in the 6-step process to the right in just a few seconds, right? The range itself is there to give the user a reference of premium and discount, but what should keen the trader's interest is not the actual range itself, but the POIs within the range. Guys, fractals themselves are great. You can utilize them with time-based POIs. The range is phenomenal to give you an idea of where price will more than likely reverse from, okay? Or continue from, my apologies, depending on if it's bullish or bearish, of course, or the sequence you want to look at it with. But what you guys should be looking at the most is the POIs within that range, meaning your time-based POIs, right? Your true opens, end dogs, end walks are very, very important. They're not the only thing you can look at, but again, they're important to go ahead and reference to what you want to see price do, right? So here's a step process of fractals. Sequential SMT forms, right? The correlated higher time frame range is created. Then you have the new candle opening, right? So if you have 90-minute, you then spot the 90-minute on the 5-minute, which then gives you access to the hourly time frame, right? Your hourly time frame, your hourly fractal, right? Let's say the 9 a.m. candle is your hourly fractal. When can you look for a trade? Not while the fractal is being created for you beginners. Later on in the future, I'll go over how you can take trades anticipating a fractal. But once that fractal range is closed, meaning the new hourly open occurs, then you can look for a trade. You just have to wait for that 9 a.m. candle to go ahead and distribute to then validate a trade for you, right? Then what happens? The new hourly candle opens, it seals the range, taps into EQ or OTE of the fractal range, mitigates the POIs, and then heads up higher to its higher time frame draw and liquidity, right? Again, this is a bullish example. You can flip this bearish or to your choosing, right? Now, time-based POIs. This has its own slide because it's very important. Now, I'm going to cover time-based POIs and structure-based POIs within the segment, and I haven't named time-based POIs predominantly because that's what you guys are going to be seeing most of the trades form with, right? So time-based POIs hold the most importance within the fractal range. These provide the user a reference on which one should hold and which one will more likely fail. So if you have a bearish fractal and then you have a true opener NWOG or NDOG under in discount of that bearish fractal or of that bearish range, that's probably not going to hold. It's more than likely going to go ahead and hit premium on at least one asset class, right? Premium, not of the entire expansion range, but of the fractal range, right? Which more than not will have a time-based POI attached to it, true open, NDOG, or NWOG, that will support a continuation lower. So you wait for that time-based POI to be mitigated and then take a trade back down to sell side off of it, right? Fairly simple. True opens and NWOGs and NDOGs are the most common form of these time-based POIs and will be referenced in over 90% of your trades, meaning over 90% of the trades that you guys look at will have some type of true open being referenced, okay? Now, or NWOG or NDOG. That remaining 10% when I say remaining 10%, I do not mean that the 90% does not include structure, but the remaining 10% may not have a time-based POI, and you will only be left to work with basic market structure that is implied within the range, meaning a intermediate term high or low that's created within the expansion range will be the reference point later on in the day to then host its or week or month to then host its continuation to its objective. Okay, that is not using any time-based POIs, simply just market structure and intermediate term highs and lows within the range provided. Now, there is a continuation entries video that I also made that I think all of you should watch it, and I explain this perfectly of what I mean by time-based POIs and continuation entries off of basic market structure with intermediate term highs and lows being created. I cover that in the video, so watch it if you want to understand more about this. Now, utilizing these POIs as PDAs gives the user the ability to catch continuations with ease. Fractals are not only limited to being traded off of, but can also be traded to, as long as the structure and narrative coincide with the usage of the fractal. I mentioned this 2 slides ago, and I'm going to mention it again. Structure and narrative will determine which fractal you're going to be looking at and what type of trade you're going to be taking. Fractal forms, POI overlaps within the range, take a trade to or off of the POI depending on what you want to see price do within the session, day, week, month, quarter, or year, right? Fairly simple. That's going to conclude the fractal lesson. Now we're going to get into the fractal Q&A section, in which I'll also be screen sharing example of a fractal here. All right, so let's go piece by piece here. Let's not rush it. Let's go piece by piece and go question by question, right? So some of these questions I already answered, which they were personal questions. We're going to go ahead and answer the ones that I think are the most important. So Halo, where do fractals derive from? Fractals derive from a mixture of ICT and quarterly theory alignments that basically gives you a range and supports the idea of power of 3 without neglecting the fact that every candle should host its own range, right? So again, a lot of people think that, oh, high or low of the range. What range? What's supporting that range? Is it sequential SMT? It is sequential SMT. Okay, so if it's sequential SMT, then there should be a terminus of that range providing what you may conclude a valid continuation lower or to the discount of that range, right? Now, of course, ranges themselves can be refined. There are ranges that may not have sequential SMT supporting them. Daily ranges with no sequential SMT, with no fractals whatsoever, you can then anticipate the EQ of that range or the premium or discount, depending on if it's bullish or bearish example, to then get mitigated and then form a sequential to then host a delivery from, right? Again, multi-step process, okay? Halo, so if no time-based POI aligns, then you shouldn't use it. No, as I already mentioned prior, you can go ahead and utilize time-based POIs as majority for your fractal entries, but it is not the end-all be-all in terms of the usage of a fractal. You can also utilize intermediate term highs and lows. If you haven't yet seen it in the continuation entries video, I recommend watching that video, and I cover exactly how using fractals for continuations with the lack of time-based POIs, right? So can we take a trade to a fractal even if we haven't sealed the range? You can take a trade to the OTE of the fractal without seeing the OTE of the range being, or without seeing the fractal range being mitigated or being sealed, sorry. I will tell you it's lower probability. You want to see price seal the range, and I say it's lower probability simply because if you're taking a trade to OTE and you are willingly fading price action and fading order flow on the higher time frame and the lower time frame, you're more than likely going to get stopped out and your risk reward is going to be dog shit. So ideally, you want to see that range be sealed before seeing the OT of that range, or you can just wait for OT to be mitigated and then take the trade off of it to then seal the fractal range, right? Again, a bunch of ways you can do it, right? Is NWOG is NWOG or NDOG supplementary? No, it's the time-based POI. It can either be an NWOG, NDOG, or a true open. Is there any time of day where fractals work every single day at the same time? I already mentioned to this. I replied to this in the chat yesterday. If that was the case, I wouldn't be making a video about it. I'll be selling it to Wall Street instead of showing you guys how to trade them, right? So StockBeast asks, when we get SMT that forms a fractal following a move that formed a fractal, how do you determine which fractal price will trade to first? Or would you want one of the fractals to be traded to before looking for a move to the opposing fractal? The way you worded this, homie, is horrendously, but I know exactly what you mean. So to explain what StockBeast means by this question, he's basically asking if you have multiple fractals that are coinciding with a distribution, right? So multiple bearish fractals with a bearish move on the higher time frame, which fractal are you going to validate to then see potential continuation off of? Now, when you have multiple fractals lining up that are bearish and you're opening up all the way down. So a prime example of that would be basically Friday's price action that we had this year. We had two fractals. We had a 9 p.m. fractal and a 4 a.m. fractal. So I'm going to graph out both of these, right? So 9 p.m. and then you have the 4 a.m. fractal. So this is what he means by this, right? So looking at price action in totality within this range, how are we going to utilize it? Right? I do pardon for the chart freezing. I don't know why the hell it always does this every single time I open up one chart. So notice here, to answer this question, notice how there's no true opens lining up within this OTE of the range, right? We have a true day open above it. So with true day open above the fractal range, do you expect price to go ahead and respect this range? No, you expect price to go ahead and mitigate right through it to then obtain what? The fractal that has a true open attached to it. In this case, the 9 p.m. fractal with True Asia open lining up perfectly with equilibrium of the range, right? Fairly simple logic provided for you guys. Most of you guys know this already, who've been following me for a while. So hopefully that answered your question, StockBeast. I know I already answered this question to you prior, but hopefully I was able to do it in more detail here, right? So back to the questions, right? How do I know which candle to use? For example, if we have microcycle sequential SMT from 9:45 that got hit at 10:03, we can't use the 9:45 candle. We have to wait till 10:15 to seal the range of the 10 a.m. candle. So Phillips, you answered your own question. If 9:45 doesn't create sequential SMT, it's actually created at 10:03. The sequential SMT is then supported with the 10 a.m. 15-minute candle, right? Which would then be sealed at 10:15 with the new 15-minute candle opening. And then you expect the OT to be mitigated, or depending on if you're bullish or bearish and if there's a true open or not, for it to get ran through, right? So it's pretty simple. You said I lost you. This responding to Philip's question. I remember yesterday, I already showed you an example of what I mean by that. So yeah, I mean, honestly, a prime example would be this image that I have right here. So daily cycle sequential SMT, right, created at 2:30 with NQ fitting to mitigate it and YM mitigating the previous quarter low at 2:30 a.m., which would then indicate a 2 a.m. 4-hour fractal. So you basically grab the fractal range from high to low, right? So from the high of the candle to the low of the candle, right? Bullish. I didn't specify this in the lesson, and I think I should have. If you have bullish sequential SMT, there's only 3 ways this can form. It's either going to be a PSP on the 4-hour time frame, a PRC on the 4-hour time frame, or a 4-hour fractal distribution, which is an up close candle on every single asset class, creating a distribution. Obviously, the name basically gives you what it is. If you have bullish sequential SMT, I'm giving a bullish example here. You can apply it to the bearish one as well. If you have bullish sequential SMT and the 4-hour candle is a down close candle in every asset class, that is not a fractal and will not be utilized, right? You need to have a up close candle, not a down close candle, okay? So hopefully that answers a question or a few questions that I know are definitely going to come up here in this range, right? Or here in this Q&A. So is there any case that you can utilize a different candle than the one that was created from the sequential SMT? For example, 9 a.m. hourly candle is not the best. It consolidated or whatever. Can you use a 10 a.m. hourly? So if the answer is yes, then what are the cases that you skip the candle, right? And you put in quotations, skip the candle. So the question is, in this case, no, you don't use a different candle choice, right? So there's only two scenarios where you can where you can think about doing it, and again, not probable. But first one is if it's a down closed candle. So if we're consolidating on every single asset class, after having sequential SMT, we're most likely either going to form a down closed candle in every single asset class, which doesn't make the 9 a.m. candle a fractal. And if the 10 a.m. candle closes up close, then it will be an hourly fractal. Or it's going to create a PSP or a PRC. Either way, you graph out the fractal range, you look for the true open or the time-based POI or the intermediate term high or low within that range, and you reference it for a trade. If it's a down closed candle on every single asset class with bullish sequential SMT, then you migrate it to the next candle, which should form the fractal. And if not, you move it one more time. And if it's not there, you probably have the wrong draw on liquidity, or price is not doing what it should be, coinciding sequentials with market structure, right? So what's the most reactive level of the fractal? The one that has a true open attached to it, or a time-based POI such as NWOGs attached to it, or NDOGs. Do you consider trading towards OTE if the ceiling happens on all asset class and doesn't have a cracking correlation attached to it? I do consider it, right? It all depends on what I want to see price do. Now, if there's no cracking correlations, there should be an intermediate term lower high get mitigated. That then causes me to take a short back down. If there's no intermediate term lower high being mitigated, I am not taking the trade back down to the lows, right? It's only if there's an intermediate term lower high being mitigated, which then supports the overall distribution down to the OTE of the fractal range. If one asset is at OT without sealing the range, we would still expect one to seal first and then come to OTE, right? No, not necessarily. If one asset class is at OT of the range without sealing it, right, either we're going to below right pass it, or we're going to reference that OTE with the time-based POI attached to it to then seal the range at the highs that have not been sealed yet. So this is more common with PSPs and PRCs and distributions. Why? Because PSPs and PRCs, one asset will most likely close, down close, or up close, depending if it's bullish or bearish, while the other ones are coinciding together. So like 2 up close, 2 down close, or 2 up close, 1 down close, or 1 down close, or 2 down close, 1 up close, right? The sequence is just, the PSP understanding, right? When that happens, okay, you are consolidating, and you're going to have one asset naturally is going to open within OTE. Now you have to ask yourself, are we going to raid the low of that fractal and invalidate it on one asset class to then create maybe an intermediate term low to then get rated and then host a distribution up higher? Or are we going to respect the OT that has a time-based POI to it and then see the fractal range be sealed? All coincides with what you want to see price do intraday or within the week or within the month, depending on the fractal you're looking at. This needs to be taken on a case-by-case basis, right? Hopefully one day there's a recap where I can cover this specifically and show you guys, right? Nate, I already called you personally explaining what exactly you weren't understanding, so hopefully I don't have to answer your question. The question was pretty simple too. So you mentioned that sequential SMT is the potential for fractals and that it could be the candle after the sequential SMT. What's the case? Which candle is the fractal? So I answered this question prior on why with K7US's question. So hopefully that answers your question as well, Tay. Sebas, how do you determine STH, ITH, STH within time frame alignments apart from fractals and then with fractals? So I asked you this personally, what you meant by that. You didn't answer it. If you mean by intermediate term highs, it's fairly simple. You look for an internal low that is probably the high or the low of a BISI as well. You look for that to get rated. Once that gets rated, you then look for the high that's already instilled in the marketplace and then get rated again, and then host a move back down that you want, the move you wanted to see lower back down to sell side. So that's how you utilize intermediate term highs and lows. You can also look at the continuation entries video and where I cover that, right? Sad asked, if the candle on NQ is Doji and PSP between ES or YM, which one shall I take? I answered that question also with K7US's question. So just rewatch if you can, please. It will make it substantially easier. Halo, you're only trading back into the fractal if the next open seals the previous higher low. If we open into the fractal first, we look for continuation. Ideally, yes. If you open within the fractal first, you open within the OTE, and you want to see price distribute higher and not lower, of course, it all depends if you want to see price go higher or lower, depending on the fractal that's presented, of course. If it's a bullish fractal and we open the OTE and you want to see price go higher, once OTE gets mitigated with a time-based POI, you can validate a long back up to buy side without it being sealed, right? You're basically longing to the sealage of the range, right? If it's not the following candle after the fractal that seals its range, can we still use it? Yes, you can. Again, you're gonna have to wait patiently though in that case for it to go ahead and do it, and you're basically expecting or the candle after the fractal to be a inside bar. Basically, that candle does not mitigate the high or the low of the previous candle's range, right? Which is it usually causes an expansive move after that. If we have NX or new week or new day opening gap at EQ of the fractal range and a true open at OT of the fractal range, how will you trade this? Again, Stockbeast, I said this is simply just off of basic market structure. If you're taking 10-point reactions, you're probably going to bite the bullet with the NWOG or the true open, depending which one comes up first. When I see multiple true opens attached to EQ and OTE, I usually like to go ahead and validate it with having an intermediate term low and high get created to then go ahead and take a continuation off of that. I rarely, basically never, rarely take 10-point reactions with multiple true opens attached to it or multiple time-based POIs attached to it, only because the likelihood of me getting stopped out is higher. There usually is an intermediate term higher low sequence that's following up with that trade that I'm taking, right? So if the candle which created sequential SMT doesn't close as a PSP or PRC or fractal distribution, you would use the candle after? Yes, Tay, that is correct. Hi, Halo, this video has been super helpful. I'm very thankful. Question is, are we in the WAP? If we see YM with a fractal range and it taps into NDOG within the range, does that validate taking a trade on NQ or deliver, or ideally do you want to see NQ hit it as well? Donk, to answer your question, I take multiple trades where YM or ES hit the true open and NQ does not. If I'm looking for continuation, it's usually what I'm taking it off of. The true open on the asset causes price to then not see the higher low on NQ, in which I'll take the trade back down to sell side off of that logic. So yes, I do that a lot. How do you draw the fractal lines? Pretty simple. Essentially what you're doing here, you're drawing the low to the high or the high to the low in this case, right? So from this high to this low. So, or sorry, and I have to draw it out properly now. I can't be fucking around with stupid ones. So you basically have your sequential SMT, you have your OTE range, and you're drawing it from the high of the 4-hour candle or from the high of the fractal candle using the alignments I provided you to the low of the candle. And then it should line up with a true open. In this case, it does. If I were to go on the 5-minute time frame, you will see that it lines up with true London open right here, as you can see. So yeah, and the fractal range gets sealed at 6 a.m. once we go ahead and open and take out the high. Then you can validate shorts back down, right? Let's see what we have here. Sorry, hello, I didn't quite understand what you meant by sealing the fractal range to therefore. Okay, so this is what I mean by sealing the fractal range, right? So when you have your 4-hour fractal form, you now have your 4-hour range form supported by daily cycle sequential SMT. What you want to see happen now is price on the new 4-hour candle, meaning the 6 a.m. opening. This is a 2 a.m. fractal. The 6 a.m. opening to open, raid the high of the previous 4-hour range, and come back down after a time-based POI gets mitigated, or a structure-based POI such as an intermediate term high, such as this on YM that got mitigated, sends price lower down to sell side. That's how you want to do it, right? So once that 4-hour candle is closed and we seal that range, you can then validate a short back down if you'd like to, and it coincides with your narrative or structure, right? About this question, will you still consider that if the only asset in the fractal range only tap EQ, or is it better if we hit at least 0.62? It's always where the true open or the NDOG or NWOG is at. If there's no NDOG or NWOG or true open, I'm not looking at it. If it's just that, if there's intermediate term highs within the range, I would coincide with it as well. Ideally, if there's no true opens and just intermediate term highs or lows, you want to see at least OTE of that range get mitigated. Halo question, can you give me a quick explanation on why you referenced the Wednesday daily candle? I don't understand. We had true day open lined up perfectly, but it never got sealed. So this is, again, using structure and narrative. Higher time frame structure, Again, higher time frame structure is bearish overall. Intermediate time frame creates a bullish push up higher and a fat drop following after that. We have sequential SMT up at the highs here, 90-minute with a 1 hour range. Then you have daily cycle sequential SMT at the lows, intermediate term high up here formed. Now, why did this one not hold a reaction off of it? Simple, because when did we tap into it? 5:30. We tap into it at 5:30, meaning what? We're still forming the 4-hour fractal range. 6 a.m. opens and then takes out the previous 6 a.m. candles high, or sorry, the 2 a.m. candles high. Basically tapping into this range, also tapping into the OT of this hourly fractal here, and simultaneously YM mitigates the DFR high, which is also an intermediate term high within the range, that then causes price to then eat shit and see price go lower. So hopefully that answers your question of why I wanted to see price go lower. Simply just an intermediate term high that's bearish to then target a time-based POI that lines up with a higher time frame range. You don't have to always see the range get sealed on the higher time frame, especially if you have intermediate time frame or lower time frame ranges being created that are supporting a bearish objective with the overall bearish narrative that you already have instilled in the marketplace. Fairly simple answer. Okay. So the exact element that forms a sequential SMT would also be our fractal. Yes, in most cases, right? I already answered this question. Just analogy. Yeah, okay, whatever. Cool. All right, lovely. So that wraps up the fractal Q&A and lessons. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Again, I do apologize for this being recorded again and for it not working the first time. Hopefully you guys are able to go ahead and watch this video and learn from it. Love you guys. Stay safe. Much love. And I'll see you guys later. And as always, if there's any questions, ask me and I'll gladly respond. Peace.